He married her to keep a child safe. He never imagined she'd return the one he thought he'd lost forever. This is not just a story about second chances. It's about the quiet kind of love that rebuilds broken things. And the moment everything changes because someone dared to stay. If stories of hope, healing, and the quiet power of love speak to you, we'd be honored to have you with us. Subscribe and join a growing community where every story matters. Now let's begin. The Vermont autumn had settled in like an old quilt, soft, heavy, and laced with the scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves. At the edge of an overgrown gravel road, Cassian Rhodes stood with one hand resting on a rusted metal gate, the other holding a chipped enamel mug half full of lukewarm coffee. He had no plans that day, or the next, or the next. Time didn't pass out here. It just lingered. 6 years had gone by since the court hearing that stripped him of custody. 4 since his ex-wife disappeared with their daughter, vanishing like smoke from a dying fire. He'd spent the first year chasing shadows, following every rumor and false lead. The second year, he shut the world out. Now, he merely existed, maintaining the barn, tending the chickens, keeping things quiet enough not to feel anything too sharp. Then came the knock. Not on his front door, but on the gate. A sound so foreign it might as well have been thunder. Cassian squinted toward the gravel curve and saw them a woman in a black dress, wind-blown hair, a child wrapped in her arms. The little one's head lolled, clearly feverish. The woman's face, pale, panicked, and beautiful in a haunted way, searched for recognition. She didn't find any. He walked toward them slowly, the gravel crunching under his boots. The woman didn't back away, but there was a kind of silent pleading in her eyes that made his throat tighten. "I'm sorry," she said quickly before he could speak. "I know how this looks. We just needed somewhere warm, just for the night. I swear I'll work for it. Clean, do anything." Cassian looked down at the girl. Her small face was flushed, her breath shallow, and her lips parted slightly, as though whispering in a dream. "She's burning up," he muttered more to himself than her. The woman nodded. "She's been sick all night. I tried to get to the clinic in town, but they said I needed proof of insurance, or they'd send us to the next county." Cassian stared at them a moment longer. Then he unlatched the gate with a reluctant clink. "Come on," he said, turning. "I've got aspirin and hot water. That'll have to do for now." They followed him past the barn down a dirt path strewn with leaves toward a worn farmhouse that had once held life and music and Sunday pancakes. Now it was quiet, like everything else Cassian touched. Inside, he guided her to the old leather couch and handed her a folded wool blanket. "What's her name?" "June," the woman whispered, brushing damp curls from the girl's forehead. "Juniper Thorn. I'm Elowen. Most people just call me Ellie." Cassian nodded slowly, chewing the name over. Elowen. It sounded like wind in trees. He brought a cool cloth, a tin of aspirin, and a bowl of water. June barely stirred. Cassian found himself kneeling beside the couch, studying the curve of her tiny hands, the lashes that fanned across her cheeks like his daughters once had. "You live out here alone?" Elowen asked, softly, almost apologetically. Cassian straightened. "Yeah. Been that way for a while." She didn't push, didn't fill the silence with chatter like most people might when trying to make up for invading someone's space. She just nodded and turned back to her daughter. It wasn't until he made them tea an hour later that she finally spoke again. "I buried my husband 4 days ago," she said flatly. "His family threw me out of the house before the service was even over. They said I wasn't legally on the deed, and since we never updated the will." She shook her head. "We just started the adoption process for June. She's not mine by blood, but she's mine." Cassian watched her as she stroked the girl's hair. There was a fierce softness in Elowen, a kind of grief-hewn grace that reminded him of the women in old stories, the ones who endured wars, not just waited for men to return from them. And now he asked, "I have 48 hours to prove to the state that June is living in a stable family environment, or they'll place her in emergency foster care. And I don't have a job. I don't have a permanent address. I don't have a husband." Cassian exhaled. He felt something shift inside his chest, something that had been dormant too long, an ache he'd grown used to ignoring. "So you need a man," he said quietly. "I need someone kind enough to pretend," Aloan replied, meeting his gaze. "Just long enough for the paperwork to clear." Cassian looked back at June. Her little chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, her hand curled loosely over the wool blanket. She looked small, fragile, like someone you could lose if you blinked. He turned toward the window. The sun had begun to dip behind the hills, casting the field in amber light. His reflection stared back at him in the glass, older than he remembered, lonelier too. Then he said the words that would alter the trajectory of all three lives, "I'll marry you." The courthouse in Bennington was smaller than Aloan remembered. Red brick slightly sunken into the hill, with faded white pillars that gave it a kind of solemn dignity. The sort of place where stories began and ended, with ink on paper, not tears. Cassian hadn't spoken much during the drive. He'd offered her the passenger seat, nodded once when she thanked him, then focused on the road, as if it were a narrow trail through emotional minefields. Aloan didn't press him. His silence didn't feel like anger. It felt like weight, something he'd carried far too long to set down easily. Inside, the clerk handed them a form. Just one page. The simplicity of it startled Aloan. Her entire world and June's reduced to a few blank lines, a notary stamp, and a declaration of legal intent. They filled it out in a quiet corner near the window, using a pen attached to a faded plastic flower. "Occupation?" she asked, eyeing the line. Cassian paused. "Used to be search and rescue. Fire division. These days, I guess. Part-time handyman, full-time recluse." Aloan smiled faintly. "I'll just put self-employed." When it came time to sign, her hand trembled. Cassian noticed. He gently pressed a palm against the paper to steady it, not touching her, just anchoring her. She didn't look at him, but the gesture lodged in her chest like a pebble that would keep rippling long after this moment passed. The officiant was a kind-eyed woman named Margaret, who looked like she'd retired twice, but stayed because she couldn't bear to leave the people behind. She read the formal words with practiced cadence, pausing only briefly when Cassian nodded his consent. "I, Cassian Rhodes, do solemnly swear." It struck Aloan then this wasn't a rehearsal. This was real. Not a joke. Not a desperate plan whispered in fear. She was marrying a man she'd known for less than 48 hours. And yet in the way he stood firm but not rigid, reserved but not cold, she sensed a kind of safety she hadn't felt in years. When it was her turn, she faltered. Just for a second. Long enough for Margaret to raise an eyebrow in quiet encouragement. "I, Aloan Thorne, do solemnly swear." The words came. She said them. Meant them, even if not in the way people expected. Margaret didn't ask them to kiss. She simply smiled, stamped the form, and said, "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Rhodes. May this union be whatever you both need it to be." They left with a copy of the certificate in a manila envelope, and a strange, lingering silence between them. In the parking lot, Cassian opened the truck door for her, an old-fashioned habit he hadn't forgotten. As she climbed in, she caught his reflection in the window. He looked steadier, somehow, like someone who'd made peace with something private. "Thank you," she said, as he turned the key in the ignition. He didn't reply right away, just drove. Then, quietly, "You're not the first person I've tried to save." She looked at him startled. "My ex-wife, she struggled with postpartum depression after our daughter was born. Said she felt like the world was muffled, like she was underwater, watching everyone breathe on land. I didn't understand. I thought I could fix it. Be patient. Give her space. But one day she took our little girl and left. Just vanished. No trace. No goodbye. No closure. Alawan's breath caught. Did you ever find them? He shook his head. Private investigators. Missing persons reports. Nothing stuck. No credit cards, no known addresses. It's like they were ghosts. I'm so sorry. He gave a half smile. Grief has a funny way of folding itself into your daily routine. One minute you're fixing a hinge on a barn door, the next you're remembering the sound of your daughter's laugh and wondering if it still sounds the same. Silence hung between them. Not awkward, not heavy, just real. Back at the farmhouse, June was asleep on the couch, her fever broken. Alawan tiptoed over, brushed a kiss on her forehead. The child stirred, but didn't wake. She's stable, Cassian said softly. I checked her temp when we got in. Still a little warm, but no more shivering. Thank you, Alawan whispered. Cassian stood in the doorway, arms crossed. You can stay in the guest room. Second door on the left. I'll be in the barn if you need anything. She turned. You don't have to go. He shook his head. We may be married on paper, but that doesn't give me a right to invade your space. I built that barn to be mine. I'll stick to it. Alawan's eyes softened. You're not invading anything, Cassian. You're protecting us. That's not nothing. That night, Cassian sat in the barn staring at a photo he kept hidden behind an old toolbox. A picture of him and a 4-year-old girl, her arms wrapped around his neck. Her laugh captured mid-sound. His heart ached, not just from the memory, but from something else. June, the way she looked at him, the sound of her voice when she'd asked for water and called him daddy without hesitation. He knew it was dangerous to hope. Hope had teeth. It bit hardest when you forgot it could. But still, for the first time in years, he wondered, what if this paper marriage wasn't just a kindness? What if it was the beginning of something real? The wind in Vermont could whisper like an old friend or howl like a warning. That morning, it did both. Cassian stood on the porch with his coffee cooling in his hand. The sky had turned a soft pewter, and leaves swirled in slow spirals across the field. Inside the house was no longer silent. June's footsteps light, as sparrow wings echoed through the floorboards, and Alawan's quiet hum in the kitchen floated on the air like warmth itself. It was strange how quickly life could re-enter a place. For years, Cassian had trained himself not to hear the silence. Now, it was the soft sounds of domesticity that unsettled him. He stepped inside. June sat cross-legged on the living room floor, a pencil clutched in one small hand, a pad of paper in the other. Her brows furrowed in focus. Cassian paused at the threshold unnoticed, watching the way she stuck her tongue out just slightly when she concentrated exactly like his daughter used to. His heart stuttered. Then she looked up and beamed. Hi, Daddy. The word hit him square in the chest. He didn't correct her. Couldn't. Hi, June, he said, his voice steady only because he willed it so. What are you drawing? She turned the sketch pad toward him. A red barn with a tire swing. A big tree beside it. A dog near the fence, though they had no dog. But what caught his breath was the figure near the door. A man in jeans and a flannel shirt with a black baseball cap, holding hands with a little girl. He knew that hat. He wore it every fall. That's you and me, June said proudly. I remember it from a dream. But I think it's a real memory. Cassian crouched beside her. A real memory, she nodded seriously. I had it again last night. You were picking me up and twirling me. Mommy was inside baking cookies. Cassian's pulse surged. Your mommy? Alawan June blinked. No, my first mommy. The one I don't remember well. Alawan coming from the kitchen with a dish towel in hand, froze mid-step. "What do you mean, honey?" she asked softly. June shrugged. "I think I had another mommy before I came to live with you. I forget her name. But she had sad eyes. Cassian couldn't move. That night, he couldn't sleep. The house was quiet again, but now it felt like it was listening. He wandered the hallways, stopping outside the room that used to belong to his daughter, paint still faintly pink beneath a coat of neutral beige. June now slept there at her insistence. Said it felt like home. Cassian leaned against the doorframe, listening to her breathing. Then he heard it. A whisper. "Daddy." He spun around. Nothing. The air was still. The hallway, dark, only the orange glow from the porch light filtering in through the front window. But the voice, it had been real. He stepped inside the room. June was asleep, arms curled beneath her chin, her face calm. Cassian stood there for a long moment, just watching her, until something caught his eye on the dresser, her sketch pad. He picked it up. The most recent page wasn't the barn. It was him. Or what looked like him, standing in a doorway looking out. In the drawing, a small figure stood on the other side, reaching for him, through what appeared to be fog or glass. Cassian felt the hair on his neck rise. The next morning he entered the attic for the first time in years. Dust rose around him like ghosts, startled from slumber. He pushed aside boxes marked Christmas Camp Gear Cassie's Art Supplies. There, beneath a moth-eaten quilt, was the small wooden box. It had belonged to his daughter. He'd carved it himself, clumsy hearts, and a single inscription etched into the underside of the lid, "Daddy will always find you." His breath caught. The same inscription Elowen had once mentioned when she was unpacking June's things. She'd found a box. She said no key, no context. Just that line, like a whisper from someone long gone. Cassian clutched the box to his chest and sat on the attic floor. How could it be? Was it possible? Later that afternoon, he found Elowen folding laundry on the porch. He stood there for a moment, the box in hand, his face unreadable. "I need to ask you something," he said, "and I need you to be honest." She looked up, startled by the tone. "Where did June come from, Ellie, really? Not what you told the state, not what the agency wrote down. The truth." Elowen's face drained of color. "I told you. I took her in after she was left behind. Left by whom Elowen looked away. I don't know. I really don't. She was found outside a motel. No ID, no luggage. Just her and that box." She gestured to the one in his hands. "I didn't recognize the inscription at first. Not until I moved in here and saw your name burned into your old fire helmet. Then it hit me. Why didn't you say something? Because I didn't know how. Because I thought it was coincidence. Because I was afraid." Cassian stepped forward, voice thick. "Afraid of what? Afraid that if she was yours, you'd take her. That she'd love you more. That I'd lose her." Elowen's voice cracked. "I know it's selfish. But Cassian, I didn't take her from you. I just never gave her back." They stood in silence. Then Cassian did something neither of them expected. He sat beside her, placed the box gently on her lap, and whispered, "Maybe we can both give her back. Together." It rained that night. Not a light drizzle, but a steady, soul-soaking downpour that seemed to echo everything Cassian felt, but couldn't say. The barn's tin roof drummed like an anxious heartbeat above him as he sat alone on the workbench, the box still in his lap. Elowen's words replaying like a scratchy recording. "I didn't take her from you. I just never gave her back." It wasn't betrayal that hollowed him. It was the aching possibility she might be telling the truth. And if she was, what did that mean for him? For June? For this strange, fragile house they were starting to build together, yet not. He opened the box again. The smell of old wood and lavender drifted up faintly. Inside were the little things only a parent would recognize: a pink barrette, a folded crayon drawing a tiny fabric star Cassie had sewn when she was 5. He turned the lid over. "Daddy will always find you." He had written those words the night before, the custody hearing carving them slowly, while his daughter slept upstairs. A promise carved in desperation. And now, here they were, returned to him not by the system, not by law, but by fate or grace, or some twist in the universe he still couldn't comprehend. He couldn't sleep. At dawn, he made coffee, stepped onto the porch, and saw June wrapped in her fuzzy blanket curled up in the porch swing, with her sketchbook balanced on her knees. He hesitated. She looked up. "I dreamed about you again." Cassian eased down beside her. "Yeah," she nodded, flipping the page. "We were at a lake. I was really little. You helped me build a raft out of sticks, and you had a scar on your arm." She pointed. "That one." Cassian felt his heart stutter. He'd gotten the scar on his forearm from a glass shard during a house fire rescue. Cassie had been 3 when she traced it with her fingers and said Daddy's lightning bolt. He never told anyone that, never even repeated the story. He stared at the sketch pad. The drawing was crude, but unmistakable him, in a red flannel shirt, a little girl in overalls beside him holding a stick raft. Trees in the background, his scar just a line, but there. He swallowed hard. "June who told you about that memory?" "No one," she said simply. "It's just always been there. But I didn't know it was real until now." Elowen appeared at the screen door holding a mug. She didn't speak, just watched. Cassian stood. He'd made his decision hours ago. That afternoon, while Elowen took June to the library's story hour in town, Cassian returned to his old laptop, one he hadn't powered on in 2 years. He blew off the dust, let it boot, and opened a folder he'd once tried to forget. Search reports. Cassie. Dozens of PDFs, interview transcripts, court documents, a scanned image of his ex-wife's final note found crumpled on a motel bed beside a half-eaten sandwich. She had written in jittery cursive, "I can't do it anymore. Someone else will take better care of her." Forgive me. Cassian had never forgiven her. Until now he hadn't even tried. He pulled up the intake records from the same town the motel had been in. There it was. A girl approximately 2 years old, abandoned on the doorstep of a fire station 4 days after his wife's note. No name given. No DNA test ever performed. No one thought to connect the child to the missing persons report that had come through just days earlier from another state. But he saw it now. The timing, the location, the mystery. He leaned back in the chair, breath shallow. He picked up his phone and made the call. That evening, Elowen returned home to find Cassian standing in the kitchen, pale but focused. "I sent in a sample for a paternity test," he said before she could ask. Elowen put the grocery bag down slowly. His voice was even, but strained. "Not because I don't believe you, because I need to believe myself." She walked toward him. "Cassian, I need proof. Not because I want to take her away or undo this, whatever this is between us, but because if she really is my daughter, I owe her a father who knows, not just one who guesses and hopes." Elowen's shoulders dropped, her voice cracked. "I understand. I want that too." He hesitated. Then, there's something else. He reached for the sketchbook, now filled with weeks' worth of drawings, and opened to the pages he hadn't shown her. Yet the raft, the scar, the barn, from an angle only someone inside the house would know. She remembers things she shouldn't, things only Cassie could. Tears slipped down Elowen's cheeks. "I've always known she was a miracle. I just never imagined she might be someone's second chance." Cassian looked up, his voice a whisper. "She might be mine." They didn't say much after that. June was already asleep upstairs, the rain pattering gently against the window panes. Elowen sat beside Cassian on the couch, the sketchbook between them, like a shared journal of two lives braided into one. Eventually, she leaned her head on his shoulder. And for the first time in years, Cassian closed his eyes not to escape, but to rest. Not in grief, but in hope. Cassian didn't sleep much the night after mailing the DNA kit. He told himself it was just logistics, that it was necessary to be sure to be fair. But beneath that rationality sat something messier, something he didn't want to name fear. Fear that he was wrong. Fear that he was right. Fear that either outcome would tear something precious from the fragile ground he and Elowen were just beginning to till. By morning, the rain had stopped, but the house was thick with silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind where emotions creaked under floorboards and truth waited behind closed doors. Cassian found Elowen in the laundry room folding June's clothes into neat, practiced stacks. He leaned in the doorway, arms crossed. "She's wearing a new necklace," he said gently. Elowen nodded without looking up. "She made it at story time yesterday. Called it her bravery chain. Said it keeps the bad dreams quiet." "She talked to you more about the dreams." Elowen hesitated. "She said in one of them you were holding her at a train station. She had a suitcase. You kissed her forehead and said, 'I'll always come find you no matter how far.'" Cassian felt his stomach clench. He had said those exact words to his daughter Cassie the night before her mother left. She was only 4. She'd been crying, afraid of the dark, and he knelt beside her bed and made a solemn promise he had failed to keep. The memory sliced deeper than any knife. Elowen turned around, then folding, stopped, her hands trembling. "I need to ask you something," she said quietly. Cassian braced himself. "Why didn't you tell me about the DNA test before you did it?" He opened his mouth, then closed it, searched for honesty in a tangle of justification. "Because I was afraid," he finally admitted, "of what her voice didn't rise. That made it worse, of being wrong or right, of what either truth might do to us." "To us," she repeated, blinking. "Cassian." "What us?" He took a step forward. "You know what I mean." "No," she said louder now. "I don't. Because for the past few weeks I've been trying to figure out what this is. A safe house. A silent agreement. Maybe someday. And now I find out you sent our daughter's hair off to a lab without even telling me. She's my daughter too." Cassian snapped more harshly than he intended. The words echoed. Elowen's eyes flooded. "Was that test for her, or was it for you?" Cassian's jaw tensed. "It was for all of us." "No," she said. "If it had been for all of us, you would have brought it to the kitchen table. You would have handed me the box and said, 'Let's do this together.'" The silence roared. "You didn't," she said, stepping past him. "Because deep down you still don't trust me." Cassian reached for her arm. She pulled away like she'd been burned. "Ellie, please. I opened my whole life to you, Cassian," she whispered. "I risked everything. I let you into her world. Let you be her father in every way that mattered. And the second things got too real, you shut me out. I never meant—" "You always mean well," she said, eyes glistening. "That's not the same as being kind." He stood there as she disappeared up the stairs, the sound of her footsteps softer than the pain they left behind. Later that evening the wind picked up again, but this time it howled. Elowen packed a single duffel bag, just enough for a few days. She found Cassian in the barn hammering boards that didn't need fixing. "She's sleeping," Elowen said quietly. "We'll be gone before she wakes." His hammer stilled mid-strike. "You're leaving," his voice was a hoarse whisper. "I need space," she said. "We need space. I can't stay where I'm not trusted." He looked up, eyes haunted. This house, it finally started to feel alive again. "I know," she said. "It did for me, too." He stepped forward. "Don't go. Not yet." She shook her head. I love her like my own Cassian. But I'm not her mother. And maybe you are her father. But we can't raise her in a house built on half-truths and what-ifs. She handed him the sketchbook. It's hers. But I think it was meant for you. He took it with shaking hands. Where will you go, I don't know, she said. But I'll send the address. If the test comes back, and if it confirms what we both feel, then we'll talk. And if it doesn't, she hesitated. Then we still talk. But not like this. Not with this much pain between us. That night, the house was silent again. Too silent. Cassian didn't go upstairs. Couldn't bear to see June's room empty again. Instead, he sat in the living room with the sketchbook on his lap and one page open. It wasn't a drawing. It was a list. Scrawled in 7-year-old handwriting. Things I remember. Daddy's scar. 2. Pink star box. 3. Tire swing. 4. Train station 5. His voice. 6. The way he held me when I was scared. 7. Mommy's sad eyes. Easton read it twice. Then again. Tears spilled down his cheeks and into his palms, silent and unrestrained. He wasn't sure if he'd lost them both again, or if this was the moment that would finally teach him how to hold on. Either way, he knew one thing. The test result was coming, and it wouldn't just change the facts, it would change the future. Autumn deepened its grip on the hills. The trees outside Cassian's window flamed gold and rust, but inside the farmhouse everything dulled. The light, the air, the man himself. 3 days had passed since Alawan and June left. The house was clean, immaculate, in fact. Cassian had scrubbed floors that didn't need scrubbing, dusted shelves, no one touched, rearranged furniture he would likely move back tomorrow. Not out of purpose, out of ache. Grief, he'd come to understand, wasn't loud. It was quiet. It was the fork, left out after dinner, the echo of laughter in a house that had grown used to it, the way your hand reached for a second coffee cup out of habit, and then stopped. On the 4th morning, he opened the mailbox and found a plain white envelope with a bold blue return address. Paternity confirmation. Confidential, he held it like it might explode. Back inside, he sat at the kitchen table, the one where June had once spilled syrup, and Eloan had once laughed once. He opened the envelope, read it again. And then he exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding for 6 years. 99.999% probability of biological paternity. Cassie was June, and June was home. His hands trembled not from shock, but from relief so profound. It felt like pain leaving the body. He didn't call Alawan right away. Instead, he returned to the barn. Not to fix things, not this time, but to think. The silence wasn't comforting anymore. He stood beside the old workbench and placed the sketchbook on top. Flipping through the pages felt different now. These weren't guesses or hopes. These were memories, fragments of a little girl's past stitched together like a patchwork quilt. Her drawings hadn't just been pictures. They'd been breadcrumbs, signs she'd been waiting for him even when she didn't know it. Cassian set the sketchbook down and whispered almost reverently, "You found your way back." But then came the next truth, quiet and bitter. He might still lose her, not because of a court ruling or the past, but because he had hurt the only woman brave enough to bring her back to him. That evening he sat at the dining room table with his cell phone beside him. The number was already dialed, just waiting for his finger to press the button. But he didn't. Instead, he walked upstairs, first time since they left. The room was untouched. June's pillow still held the faint curve of her head. A small purple sock lay on the floor like a forgotten prayer. Cassian sank onto the edge of the bed and reached beneath it. The pink star box was still there. He opened it, inside a new drawing, one he hadn't seen before. It was simple, a family. A tall man, a woman with long hair, and a little girl holding both their hands. Above them, written in child scrawl, Home. Cassian's throat tightened. He went back downstairs and finally pressed call. Alawan had been staying at a small cabin rental just 2 towns over. She didn't answer the first time or the second. But on the third, her voice came through quiet and wary. "Hello, it's me," Cassian said. A pause. "Hi, I got the results." She waited. "It's her," he said. "Cassie." "June. I mean, she's my daughter." Silence again. Then softly, "I know. You knew before I did." "I did," she admitted. "But not because of the box or the timing. I knew because she looks at you the way a child only looks at someone they once belonged to." Cassian swallowed hard. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," she replied. "Just tell me what you're feeling." He looked around the house. Lonely. She exhaled, not in judgment, but in understanding. "I hurt you," he said. "I didn't trust you. I panicked. And in doing that, I made you feel like you didn't matter." "You didn't make me feel that way," she said gently. "I felt it because I already feared it. You just confirmed what I was afraid to name." He closed his eyes. "I want to fix this. Not just for June. For us." There was a long silence. Then Alawan's voice returned, softer than before. "I want that too, Cassian. But we can't tape it back together and pretend it wasn't cracked. We need to rebuild. From the ground up, honestly. I'll start wherever you say." She hesitated. "Start by showing her the truth. Show her who you were. Who you are now. Then come find us." The next morning, Cassian packed a box. Inside he placed the DNA results, the pink star box, a photo of him and little Cassie from years ago, and the sketchbook. He also packed something else, a letter, written by hand, to his daughter. It read, "My sweet girl, I tried to find you every day. And even when I couldn't, I never stopped being your dad. If you'll let me, I'd like to tell you stories. Of who you were, of who you are, and of everything we can be from this day forward. Love, Daddy." He got in the truck and drove. The road to the cabin was narrow, hemmed in by trees, already turning the color of fire. Cassian hadn't been down this way in years, not since he was a teenager, sneaking off with friends to fish the hidden creeks nearby. It felt like stepping into a memory he didn't know he still held, softened now by time and grief and something close to hope. He followed the directions Alawan had texted 2 days earlier, just coordinates and a short message. "We'll be here until the weekend. Come when you're ready." He was. The cabin was small and weather-worn, perched at the edge of a lake that mirrored the sky. There was a single porch swing, a yellow bicycle leaning against the side, and smoke rising gently from the chimney. Cassian parked the truck under a crooked pine and sat for a moment, his fingers resting on the worn leather steering wheel. This wasn't about the DNA test anymore. It was about choosing to show up, choosing to stay, choosing to be the man June deserved, no matter how imperfect the road that led him here. He grabbed the box from the passenger seat, stepped out, and walked up the creaking steps. Before he could knock, the door opened, and there she was. June stood barefoot in the doorway, her hair tousled from a nap, a red crayon still smudged on her cheek. When her eyes found him, something lit up, like recognition, not just happiness. "Daddy," she said. Cassian's chest tightened, not from pain this time, from wonder. "Hey, sweetheart," he said gently. "Can I come in?" She nodded solemnly and took his hand. Inside, the cabin smelled like cinnamon and cedar. Alawan sat at the table, her sleeves rolled up her hands, still dusty with flour. She didn't rise, just looked at him. Their silence was not empty. It was full. Full of things neither of them had words for. Cassian set the box on the table and opened it slowly. He took out the letter he had written and slid it across to June. She opened it carefully, her small fingers tracing the handwriting before she started to read, whispering each word aloud in that halting, beautiful way children do. By the second line, she was crying. By the last, so was Aloan. June looked up at Cassian with tear-glossed eyes and asked, "Do you want to see my drawings?" Now, he knelt beside her. "I would love to." She led him to the corner of the cabin where her papers were scattered like fallen leaves. She showed him one after another, trees and stars, and stick figures dancing under fireworks. But the last page stopped him. It was them. Not the old family. The new one. Aloan. June. Him. They were holding hands on the same porch he'd just stood on, and above their heads in her unmistakable scrawl, she had written, "Found again." He turned to Aloan, who was now beside him. "She knew before we did." Aloan smiled through her tears. "She's always known. The heart doesn't wait for paperwork." Cassian exhaled emotion catching in his throat. "You were right. I should have let you in. Should have believed." She touched his arm. "You were grieving. I was protecting. We both built walls to survive. Now, maybe it's time to build something new." Later that evening, as dusk bled into twilight, they sat outside wrapped in blankets, the lake glowing like molten glass. Cassian sipped coffee. June snuggled against him, drawing on his arm with a finger. Aloan sat across from them, the firelight softening the sharp edges of the last few weeks. "I talked to a friend who works in family court," Cassian said quietly. "She said there's no legal battle if the guardian consents to amendment of custody." Aloan nodded slowly. "And I do, but not just on paper," he added, turning to her. "I want us to raise her together, not out of obligation, out of intention." Aloan stared at the flames. "What if we're still too broken?" Cassian leaned forward. "Then we build something with the cracks showing. Kintsugi? You know that Japanese pottery thing?" She nodded, stronger because of the damage, not in spite of it. A long silence followed. Then Aloan whispered, "Okay." Cassian blinked. "Okay," she smiled, slow and real. "Okay." That night, as June slept, curled between them on the pull-out couch, Cassian whispered in the dark, "Do you ever wonder why she ended up with you?" Aloan didn't hesitate, "Because I needed someone to believe in, and she needed someone to hold her until you were ready." He reached across and found her hand. Neither of them said anything more. There was no need. They were already building the kind of home you couldn't measure in square feet or title deeds, the kind that began with mercy and ended in love. The rain came softly that morning, tapping gently against the cabin roof, like an old friend asking to be let in. Cassian stood by the window, a mug of coffee in hand, watching the gray mist slide over the lake like silk. Aloan sat at the table behind him, her hands wrapped around her own cup, the silence between them no longer heavy, just full. June was sprawled on the floor with crayons and paper humming tunelessly, creating entire worlds with every stroke. It felt like breathing for the first time in years. Cassian turned from the window. "She's different here," he said, quietly. Aloan looked over at June. "She's lighter. Like the past is just paint she can choose not to use." He nodded, then stepped toward the girl. "Hey, June." She looked up, eyes wide and curious. "Would you want to come outside with me? I know it's drizzling, but I've got something I want to show you." June grinned. "Can I bring my rain boots? Only if they're bright enough to scare away the clouds." They tromped through the wet grass a few minutes later, Cassian in his work boots, June in neon pink galoshes that squeaked with every step. Aloan watched from the porch, her hands tucked into the sleeves of her cardigan, her smile soft. Cassian led June to the dock, where he'd set up a small folding table under a plastic awning. On top, a blank canvas waited. "I found this in the truck," he said, gesturing toward the easel. "Back when I thought I could paint like my mother. Spoiler alert, I couldn't. But I figured maybe you could." June's eyes lit up. He handed her a small case of watercolor paints, gently used with a few dried streaks left from years ago. Cassie's streaks. His chest tightened, but he smiled through it. "I thought maybe you could paint something real today," he said. "Something that feels like right now." She sat eagerly dipping her brush in rainwater pooled on the awning edge. Her strokes came slow, at first hesitant, but then her movements grew confident, bolder. Cassian stepped back, letting her work. Alawan joined him a few minutes later, slipping her hand into his. Neither spoke for a while. Just watched. "What are you painting, sweetheart?" she asked gently. June answered without looking up. "I'm painting Daddy's house. But not how it looked before. How it'll look when we go back." Cassian blinked. "We're going back." June nodded. "Of course. We have chickens to feed." Alawan laughed, and even Cassian smiled. There it was again, that thread of belonging, woven so seamlessly by a child who didn't care about DNA reports or missed years. She simply knew who her people were. Later that afternoon, the rain grew steadier, the kind that deepened colors and made everything feel more honest. Cassian walked the wooded path behind the cabin, while Alawan stayed back to make lunch. The trees whispered overhead. He remembered walking here as a boy, trying to outrun grief when his father died, trying to understand the kind of pain that didn't leave bruises, but still broke things inside you. Now he walked with something else in his chest, something like peace. When he returned, Alawan was waiting on the porch, arms crossed against the chill, her eyes unreadable. "Want to go for a drive?" she asked. Cassian raised a brow. "Where to?" "There's something I want to show you. Or rather, someone." They drove in silence for the first few miles, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Cassian glanced at Alawan every now and then. She looked calm. Braver somehow. She guided him toward a stretch of highway, then down a back road lined with maple trees. Eventually, they pulled up beside a small white building, tucked between a church and a post office. A sign out front read, "Willow Hill Family Services." Cassian looked over. "You've been here before?" She nodded. "After I found June. When I realized no one was coming for her, I brought her here. They tried to find her parents, but nothing matched. So, they told me I could foster her until something changed." Cassian looked at the building. "And you never stopped," she said. "Because every time she looked at me, I knew I'd been given someone to love, and I wasn't going to wait for permission to do it." She paused. "I thought maybe we could bring her here again. Not because she has to, but because we choose to start her record over. Together. Legally." Cassian stared at her emotion catching in his throat. "You want to adopt her?" Alawan shook her head. "I want us to adopt her." That night, back at the cabin, June showed them the finished painting. It wasn't just a house. It was a home. Their home, his barn, her porch, flowers, a garden they hadn't planted yet. And the three of them standing together. A dog lay at their feet, even though they didn't have one yet. Above it all, in bright yellow crayon, June had written, "Where love lives." The next morning, as the rain moved on and the clouds began to break, Alawan packed their bags, and Cassian loaded them into the truck. They were going home, but not to the same place, to something better. Something earned, something loved back into life. The gravel crunched beneath the tires as Cassian pulled into the drive. The barn, worn and familiar, stood tall against the gold-washed sky. The trees surrounding the property had deepened into late autumn reds, as if the land itself was exhaling after a long-held breath. They were home, But nothing looked the same. Not because the place had changed, but because they had. Elowen opened the passenger door and stepped down slowly, her eyes roaming over the porch, the windows, the flower beds now dormant for winter. There was a stillness to the land, but it wasn't hollow anymore. It was expectant. June leapt from the back seat, her pink rain boots hitting the gravel with a thud. "Did the chickens miss me?" Cassian chuckled. "We'll find out." June sprinted toward the barn, laughter trailing behind her like wind chimes in motion. Elowen turned to Cassian. "She runs like she owns the place." "She does," he said softly. "We all do now." They unpacked slowly that day, letting the house breathe them back in. Cassian carried the heavier bags, while Elowen dusted window panes and refluffed couch cushions. June reorganized her art supplies, announcing that the living room now doubled as her studio. Cassian stood in the hallway that evening, staring at the old family photo still hanging beside the stairwell. Him, his father, his little brother, all long gone now. The frame had collected dust, a forgotten remnant of a chapter that never reopened. But he didn't take it down. Instead, he added a new one on the opposite wall. June's painting, Where Love Lives, framed and centered, as vibrant as their future. That night, Elowen stood barefoot in the kitchen, the soft light casting warm shadows on her face. She was making chili stirring slowly, with one hand holding her phone in the other. Cassian watched her from the doorway. "You're different," he said. She glanced up. "Better or worse, stronger." Elowen smiled faintly. "You're quieter. I'm listening more." She set down the spoon. "We never talked about what this means for us. Long term. I thought we were already living the long term," he replied. She wiped her hands on a towel. "Cassian, I meant I know what you meant." He stepped forward. "And I'm not asking for promises you're not ready to give. But I am asking to keep waking up in the same house, to keep being the one who builds the fence and replaces the light bulbs and reads bedtime stories when you're too tired." Elowen exhaled slowly, then nodded. "You already are." After dinner they sat on the porch, while June fell asleep with a picture book still open on her chest. The night was crisp. Stars pushed through the sky like promises. Cassian leaned back in the old rocker. "I've been thinking about that broken gate, the one near the pasture," Elowen asked. "Yeah. I built it too fast. Just wanted to get it done. Didn't align it properly so it sticks in the cold. I kept thinking I'd fix it someday, but I never did." She tilted her head. "So why bring it up now? Because that gates us." Elowen blinked. "I tried to build something with you too fast. I was reacting instead of anchoring. We started with paperwork and fear. But what if we rebuild, not patch, but really rebuild from ground level? No assumptions, no pressure, just intention." She stared at him for a long moment, then said softly, "Then let's go tomorrow and rebuild the gate." Cassian smiled. Together. Together. The next morning, June stood in the middle of the field, arms crossed, supervising. "You're both doing it wrong," she declared. Cassian squinted at the post hole. "You sure about that, boss?" June nodded. "You need to dig deeper. Strong things start underground." Elowen laughed. "She's not wrong. It took them all morning, a few arguments, and more than one coffee break, but by afternoon, the new gate stood solid and even. The latch clicked without force. No creaks, no drag. As they stepped back to admire it, Cassian turned to Elowen. "I think this might be the first thing I've built right in years." She looked at him, not through him, not around him, but into him. "You built her right," she said, nodding toward June, now hanging upside down from the tire swing, squealing into the wind. "And she's building us back." That night, Cassian tucked June in her tiny arms, curling around his neck like ivy. "Daddy." "Yeah, baby. If I forget again, will you find me?" He kissed her forehead. Every time. Later, he returned to the porch, where Elowen was already waiting, blanket draped across her knees, mug in hand. "She's going to remember this house," Cassian said. "She'll remember the swing and the stars," Elowen replied. "And the way her father came back for her," Cassian sat beside her. "She'll remember the woman who loved her enough to carry her through the storm." Elowen smiled. "You really believe in second chances." He looked out over the field, the new gate barely visible in the moonlight. "I believe in earned chances." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and for the first time, no ghosts followed them to sleep. Only the sound of home. The invitation was handwritten on cream-colored stationery, the kind you'd find in the back of a local gift shop in a small Vermont town. There was no embossed lettering, no gold leaf, no monogram. Just 12 words scrawled in Elowen's looping, imperfect penmanship. "Join us at the barn. We've decided to do it for real." It was addressed to no one in particular, and yet everyone who received it knew exactly who we meant. The morning of the ceremony dawned with soft light breaking through a sky brushed with lavender. The fields behind Cassian's barn shimmered in early autumn dew. Rows of wooden chairs, mismatched, borrowed from neighbors, lined the freshly mowed grass in front of the wide-open barn doors. Cassian had built a new arbor from weathered wood beams, salvaged from the old shed. He'd sanded it smooth by hand, then wrapped it with strands of ivy and wildflowers June had picked from the pasture. At the top, Elowen had woven in a single white ribbon, the same one she'd tied in June's hair the first time she brought her to the farmhouse. It wasn't grand. It was true. Inside the house, Elowen stood in front of the bedroom mirror, smoothing down the hem of a soft cream-colored dress that whispered around her ankles. It wasn't new, and it wasn't bridal, but it was hers. And when she looked at her reflection, she saw someone she hadn't seen in years. Someone whole. June sat on the bed legs swinging, wearing a simple flower crown she had made that morning. "Are you nervous?" she asked. Elowen smiled. "A little. Why, because real things are always a little scary, even the good ones." June tilted her head. "You don't have to be scared. Daddy won't mess up this time." Elowen laughed. "No, sweetheart. He won't." Cassian stood at the arbor in a crisp white shirt, and the only pair of dress pants he owned, creased down the sides, but soft at the knees from years of wear. His hands were steady, but his heart beat faster than it had in years. He looked out across the chairs, filling one by one, with the kind of people who didn't need tuxedos to show they cared. Neighbors, old friends, the woman from the courthouse who had married them the first time, and had insisted on bringing lemon bars this time. And then, the music started. Not a violin or string quartet, just a single acoustic guitar played by a teenage boy from town who sang an old folk tune about second chances and finding home in unexpected places. Cassian looked up and saw them. Elowen walking across the grass, barefoot, her dress catching the breeze. And beside her, June grinning, holding a small bouquet of sunflowers and daisies, and walking with the exaggerated grace of someone who took her flower girl duties very seriously. Cassian's eyes burned, not because of the sunlight, because everything he thought he'd lost was walking toward him. Alive. They stood beneath the arbor, the three of them, while Margaret is the same. Margaret held a worn leather book and cleared her throat with unnecessary ceremony. This time, she said, eyes crinkling with joy, "You don't have to say anything you don't mean. This is yours. Say what matters." Cassian turned to Elowen. "I don't promise to be perfect," he said. "I don't promise to never screw up. But I do promise to keep showing up, to fix what breaks, to listen even when it's hard, and to never again let fear speak louder than love." Elowen's lips trembled. She took his hands. I don't promise to make life easy, she said, voice steady. But I promise to make it honest, to hold space for your past and room for our future, and to keep choosing you, even on the days when it's hard. Margaret smiled. Well, that's the most sense I've heard at a wedding in years. She looked at June. Do you want to say anything, dear? June cleared her throat. I'm just glad you two finally figured it out. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Margaret raised her hands. Then by the power vested in me again by the great state of Vermont, and this time with your whole hearts, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Cassian leaned in. Elewyn met him halfway, and as they kissed, real-rooted, fearless June clapped so hard she dropped her flowers. The reception was potluck style, under twinkle lights, strung between trees, with paper lanterns glowing like floating wishes. Someone played old country songs on a speaker. Kids chased each other with jelly-stained hands. Grown men danced like they'd forgotten they had bad knees. Cassian and Elewyn sat at a table built from reclaimed barnwood plates, balanced in their laps, arms brushing with every laugh. They didn't speak much. They didn't have to. The moment was loud enough on its own. Later, as the last lanterns flickered and guests headed home, Cassian and Elewyn tucked June into her bed, their bed in their home, and kissed her forehead. She opened one eye sleepily. Can we do the wedding again tomorrow? Cassian grinned. Let's just enjoy this one for a while. On the porch, Elewyn leaned into him as the wind swept up from the field. I never imagined my life would look like this, she whispered. Cassian wrapped an arm around her. Neither did I. He looked out at the fence they'd built together, the gate they'd fixed, the home that stood not because it had never been broken, but because they'd rebuilt it honestly, intentionally with grace. And in that stillness beneath the starlight, Cassian whispered something he hadn't said since before everything fell apart. Thank you for finding me. Elewyn smiled. You were never really lost. Years later, Cassian stood at the edge of the pasture, the morning fog curling around his boots. The fence line stretched toward the horizon, steady and weathered like the life they had built here. He rested one hand on the gate he and Elewyn had rebuilt together. The hinges creaked a little now, but they still held true. Behind him, laughter rang from the kitchen window, June's voice deeper now, nearly 12, but still full of light. She was telling Elewyn something about her school art show, the excitement bubbling in her words. Cassian smiled. Some things you never take for granted again. The house was fuller now, not with things but with people rhythm ritual. There were chipped mugs on the shelves that no one dared throw out. A worn quilt that all three of them insisted was the warmest. A corner of the living room dedicated to June's canvases and brushes, paint splotched, and beautiful a gallery of memory. Each wall held echoes, laughter, arguments, apologies, songs sung badly, tears dried gently. They'd lived a real life here, not the kind found in picture frames or perfect stories, but the kind you fight for one quiet act of love at a time. Cassian stepped inside the door, creaking as it always had. Elewyn looked up from the kitchen table, a soft smile tugging at her lips. You ready? She asked. He nodded. Is she? She was ready before either of us. A moment later, June came bounding down the stairs, a canvas in her hands, today's painting. She held it like a secret too precious to tell out loud. Where are we going to hang it? She asked, breathless. Cassian shrugged. That's up to you, kiddo. June studied the living room wall, then shook her head. No, not here. She led them through the hallway into the room that once belonged to Cassie. Then June, and now, neither. And both. She knelt beside the little dresser and opened the bottom drawer. The pink star box still sat there, tucked beside the old sketchbook and a folded copy of the DNA report that no one talked about anymore. June added the new painting gently to the drawer and closed it. "This room isn't sad anymore," she said. Cassian swallowed a lump in his throat. "No, it's not." Later that afternoon, they took a walk up the hill behind the barn, the same hill Cassian used to climb alone when the silence had felt like punishment. Now, it was something else entirely. At the top stood a bench Cassian had built one spring, nothing fancy, just a wide plank and 2 solid legs, but it overlooked the entire valley. Trees lined the ridge like sentinels. The wind brushed through the grass in steady sighs. They sat there, all three, the late sun casting long shadows behind them. Cassian looked at Aloan, then at June. "Do you remember the first time we sat here?" he asked. June nodded. "That was the day after the real wedding. You said the world looked brand new." "It did," he said. Aloan rested her head on his shoulder. "It still does." They sat in silence for a while. No one needed to speak. Not every story needed a bow tied neatly at the end. Some stories just settled, like roots into earth, like light into stained glass. Before they went back down the hill, June turned around and pointed to a small wooden sign Cassian had hammered into the ground beside the bench last fall. She read it aloud. "Found lost and found again." "That's our story," she said. Cassian wrapped an arm around her. "Yes, and it always will be." That evening, as dusk bled into night, the farmhouse glowed warm against the quiet fields. Cassian sat on the porch alone for a while after the others went in. He watched the fireflies blink in the grass, the stars punch holes through the sky, and the moonrise settle like a benediction over the roofline. He thought of the years lost, and then of the years redeemed. He didn't try to make sense of it anymore. Love had come to him not through thunder or grand declarations, but through steady presence, through a woman who stayed through a child, who believed through the man he chose to become when everything else had fallen away. He whispered a quiet prayer, not a request, not even a hope, just gratitude. Then he rose, opened the creaking screen door, and stepped back inside. Into the life he'd nearly lost. Into the love he'd been given back. Into the home he had helped rebuild not perfectly but honestly, and that was more than enough. And just like that, a man who thought he had lost everything found his way back to love, to family, and to the kind of home you don't inherit. You build one choice at a time. We'd love to hear where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and let us know. It means the world to connect with hearts from all across the globe. And if this story touched you in any way, feel free to subscribe. No pressure, just a quiet invitation to stay close if these stories bring something good into your day. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for spending this time with us. Your presence here matters more than you know. Until next time, take care and keep believing in the quiet miracles.